The galactic concord had stood for over 1,000 years, a vast empire woven together from the ambitions of 100 species, each bound by an intricate web of treaties, traditions, and unspoken understandings. And yet, on the eve of its most significant crisis, the fate of the empire did not rest with its fleets, nor its ruling council. It rested instead on a single human, a species the Concord had once deemed too reckless, too chaotic, too dangerous to invite into their carefully balanced domain. Queen Saraviel of the Victories sat upon the throne of silver and starlight, her translucent, azure-skinned advisors whispering urgently in her ears. The message was clear. War was inevitable. The fractured dominions of the empire had reached the point of no return. Even now, the Trelzar legions were mobilizing, their battle hymns echoing across the void. The Concord's unity had never been so fragile, and in their desperation, they had turned to the one factor they had always sought to avoid: humanity. Captain Elias Voss, chosen representative of the Terran Union, stood before the throne, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. The Victories, with their intricate court rituals and near telepathic understanding of each other, had always found humans unsettling. Their inability to be fully read, their erratic, often illogical decisions, their defiance of odds that should have crushed them. Humans were a variable the Concord had no equations for. "You summoned me, Your Majesty," Voss said, voice even, unreadable. Queen Saraviel studied him, her mind racing with calculations. There were always risks when dealing with humans. They were as likely to find solutions as they were to create problems. But time had run out, and the Concord needed something no other species could offer. "I have a request," she said carefully, choosing each word as though they were the last threads holding the empire together. "A task that only your kind may accomplish." A ripple passed through the court. The queen, the unshakable pillar of the empire, was asking a human for help? Voss tilted his head slightly, smirking in that infuriatingly human way. "Only humans, huh? Now I'm curious." Saraviel hesitated. There was no turning back now. "I need you to prevent a war." Voss exhaled sharply through his nose, as if he'd expected something ridiculous, but still found it mildly amusing. "That's a tall order." "The empire is fracturing," she admitted, her voice quiet. "The Trelzar believe I am too weak to hold the throne. They seek to overthrow the Concord, and my allies are hesitant to act. They fear that siding with me is a losing battle." Voss leaned forward slightly. "And you think a human can change that?" "I think only a human can," she replied. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got an empire full of species with fleets and armies, and you're coming to me, a man with a single ship and a crew that can barely agree on where to eat lunch?" "Because humans are unpredictable," Saraviel said, her silver eyes gleaming. "Every faction has already calculated how this war will unfold. They know the probabilities. They understand the risks. But when humans enter the equation, certainty dissolves. You defy expectations. You act without reason. You find ways to win when the game is already lost." Voss's smirk faded. He studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right, I'll help you. But I need something in return." Saraviel's advisors bristled. The Victories never negotiated under duress. But the queen simply inclined her head. "Name it." "The Concord has always kept humanity at arm's length," Voss said. "That ends today. If we do this, if we save your throne, you open the gates. Full membership. No more restrictions." A murmur swept through the court, but Saraviel remained still. She had known the cost would be high, but she had not expected this. Granting humanity full access to the Concord would be like handing a match to a species known for setting wildfires. But what choice did she have? "Agreed," she said, her voice steady. And with that, the fate of the empire was placed in the hands of the most unpredictable species the galaxy had ever known. The negotiations took place in the Grand Hall of the Trelzar Warlords, a brutalist chamber of jagged stone and burning braziers. Voss arrived alone, without guards, without weapons. The Trelzar, towering reptilian warriors, watched him with amused disdain. "What is this, Queen Saraviel?" Warlord Garz demanded, his voice a rumble of stone grinding against metal. A human? You insult us. Saraviel stood at Voss's side, impassive. He is my envoy. Voss stepped forward, rolling his shoulders. So, here's the deal, he began, voice casual. You think you've got this war in the bag, that you've got the numbers, the fleets, the perfect strategy. But I'm here to tell you you don't. Laughter rippled through the warlords. And why is that, little human? Gars sneered. Because you're fighting like this is just another Concord war, Voss said. But you've never fought us. Humans don't play by the rules. We don't fight fair. And if you push this, you won't just be fighting the Concord. You'll be fighting humanity. You know what that means. He let the silence stretch before leaning in, grinning. It means you lose. Gar's expression darkened. Bluster. History, Voss corrected. Every empire that's underestimated humanity has fallen. You might win at first, but then we adapt. We turn your strategies against you. We fight dirty. We don't stop. And by the time you realize you've made a mistake, it's too late. The warlords exchanged uneasy glances. The humans were an unknown variable, a chaotic force that even the most advanced species had struggled to predict. Saraviel seized the moment. You have two choices, Gars. Accept peace, or test the resolve of the most unpredictable species in the galaxy. The warlord's claws flexed against the armrest of his throne. Finally, with a slow, reluctant nod, he growled, "We will negotiate." Saraviel exhaled softly. Voss simply smirked. Another crisis averted, not through brute force, but through the one thing humans did best, throwing a wrench into the expected outcome. And as the negotiations began, one thing became clear. Humanity was no longer an outsider. They were now part of the game, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. Voss leaned back in his chair, watching the Trelzar warlords bicker among themselves. He didn't need to push further. He had done what humans did best. He had introduced doubt. And doubt, in the minds of warriors who thrived on certainty, was the deadliest weapon of all. Saraviel remained composed beside him, her silver gaze betraying nothing. But Voss had been around enough politicians to recognize when someone was desperately trying not to look relieved. The warlords continued their hushed deliberations, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Finally, Gars raised his clawed hand, silencing the chamber. "The Trelzar will not kneel," he declared. "But we are not fools. We will hold our blades, for now." Saraviel nodded, the barest flicker of victory in her eyes. "Then the Concord holds." Voss exhaled through his nose, hiding his grin. Damn, that actually worked. The warlords did not linger. They left in a storm of swirling cloaks and heavy footsteps, no doubt already scheming ways to undermine the very truce they had just agreed to. But that was a problem for another day. Today, war had been averted. As soon as they were alone, Saraviel turned to him. "That was dangerous." "Yeah," Voss admitted, stretching. "But it worked, didn't it?" She studied him, her expression unreadable. "Do you always gamble with such high stakes?" Voss chuckled. "It's only a gamble if you don't know the outcome." Saraviel's lips parted slightly, the closest thing to amusement he had ever seen from her. "And you knew they would back down?" He shrugged. "Not exactly, but I knew they'd hesitate. And hesitation is all we needed." She nodded slowly, as if filing that information away for later. "Perhaps unpredictability truly is your greatest strength." He grinned. "That, and our stubborn refusal to die." Saraviel tilted her head, something unreadable flickering in her gaze. "The Concord has underestimated humanity for too long," she murmured. "I will not make the same mistake." Voss wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he didn't. Instead, he turned his attention to the looming problem ahead. The war had been stalled, but it wasn't over. And more importantly, the deal he had struck with Saraviel still needed to be honored. Humanity was now part of the Concord, and that meant a whole new set of problems. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later. Voss had expected some resistance to humanity's entry into the Concord. What he hadn't expected was outright sabotage. "Another attack," Lieutenant Renner reported, her voice clipped as she dropped the datapad onto his desk. "Third one this week. Someone really doesn't want us here." Voss picked up the datapad and skimmed the report. Another supply ship, derailed en route to the Concorde's diplomatic hub. No casualties, this time. They're getting bolder, Rena continued. Whoever's behind this, they're making it clear. They don't want us in their empire. Voss sighed, rubbing his temples. Of course they don't. Humanity had been a wild card for too long. Too many species saw them as dangerous, disruptive. The Trelzar were just the beginning. There would be others. A soft chime sounded. Saravil's voice followed, projected through the ship's comms. Captain Voss. We need to speak. Voss exhaled. Yeah, he muttered. I bet we do. The Queen met him in a private chamber aboard the Concorde's diplomatic station. Unlike the grand throne room, this space was quiet, intimate. The walls shimmered with shifting starlight, giving the illusion of floating in deep space. Saravil sat across from him, her posture poised, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. You've seen the reports, she said. It wasn't a question. Voss nodded. Someone doesn't like change, she sighed, folding her hands. It was always going to be difficult. Many within the Concorde see humanity as a threat. They believe I have made a reckless decision. Have you? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That remains to be seen. Voss smirked. Flattering, she exhaled, closing her eyes for a brief moment before speaking again. I need you to be careful. There are forces within the Concorde that wish to see this alliance fail. They will not stop at sabotage. Voss leaned forward. Meaning? She met his gaze, her silver eyes unwavering. Meaning, Captain Voss, that someone wants you dead? A beat of silence stretched between them. Voss tilted his head. Well, he said finally, that didn't take long. Saravil's expression did not change. This is not a joke. I know, he replied. But if I let every death threat ruin my day, I wouldn't get much done. She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. You truly are impossible. He grinned. That's what they tell me. Saravil sighed. Regardless, I cannot allow anything to happen to you. If you die, this alliance dies with you. Voss considered that. He wasn't used to being that important. It was uncomfortable. All right, he said. So what's the plan? Saravil hesitated. There is someone I need you to meet. An informant. They claim to have knowledge of those working against us. Voss arched an eyebrow. And let me guess, you want me to go in alone? Saravil inclined her head. Your unpredictability makes you difficult to plan for. It also makes you difficult to assassinate. Voss chuckled. Now that's a compliment. But beneath the humor, a new tension settled in his chest. Humanity had stepped into the galactic stage, and someone, somewhere, was already trying to push them off. This was only the beginning. Voss tapped his fingers on the armrest of his chair, his mind already running a dozen calculations. An informant. A conspiracy. An empire balancing on the knife's edge. Yeah, this was getting interesting. All right, he said. Where's this informant? Saravil's expression remained unreadable. A neutral sector. The Ethereum Veil. Voss frowned. Never heard of it. You wouldn't have, she replied. It is a shadow market. A place where information, favors, and lives are traded without oversight. He exhaled sharply. Great. An intergalactic black market. That's exactly where I love going unarmed. She gave him a flat look. No one goes to the Ethereum Veil armed. It is enforced. Voss's eyes narrowed. Enforced by who? Saravil hesitated. That alone was concerning. The Queen of the Concorde was rarely unsure. A species known as the exhilarating, she finally said. They do not belong to the Concorde. They do not belong to any empire. They exist outside the laws of civilization, and yet no one dares to challenge them. Sounds friendly. They are not, she said simply. Voss leaned back, considering his options. This whole thing stank of a setup, but at this point, he was used to walking into death traps and making it out alive. So what's this informant got that's so valuable? Saravil's silver eyes darkened slightly. They claim to have knowledge of the true orchestrators behind the attacks on your ships. That got his attention. Voss sat forward. I thought it was just the usual suspects. Trelzar, isolationist factions, general xenophobic paranoia. So did I, she admitted. But if the informant is to be believed, this goes far deeper. They spoke of a third party, one that does not wish for humanity's failure, but for something much worse. His stomach tightened. What's worse than failure? Saravil's lips parted, but for once, no answer came. That was never a good sign. The Ethereum Veil was not a place. Not exactly. Voss had expected a grimy asteroid station, or some forgotten backwater world on the fringes of civilization. Instead, the Veil was everywhere and nowhere. A shifting, amorphous collection of structures floating in the black, tethered together by sheer force of will and collective greed. As his ship approached, the Veil's defensive systems scanned them with eerie precision. No weapons. No active shields. No resistance permitted. Yeah, that's comforting. His crew had protested, violently, in some cases, but Voss had made his decision. This was a solo job. Bringing backup would only make them bigger targets. The docking clamps locked into place with a soundless finality. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor bathed in soft, violet light. The air smelled of ozone and something faintly metallic. Voss stepped forward, suppressing the instinctual tension that came with being unarmed in a place where everyone else probably was. A figure awaited him at the entrance. Tall, cloaked, their face obscured by an intricate metal mask. Captain Elias Voss, the figure greeted, voice distorted. You were not followed. Glad to hear it, Voss said. I'd hate to think I made the trip for nothing. The figure tilted their head slightly. Follow. No names. No small talk. All right, straight to business then. The informant led him through a maze of dimly lit corridors. Voss noted the variety of species watching from the shadows. Some he recognized, others he didn't. The Veil was a gathering place for those who did not belong anywhere else. That made it unpredictable. Dangerous. Finally, they arrived in a secluded chamber. The room was sparse, save for a single table. On it, a small device pulsed with a faint golden light. The masked figure gestured toward it. This is what you came for. Voss narrowed his eyes. What is it? A piece of the puzzle. Care to be less cryptic? The figure hesitated. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, they pressed a finger to the device. A holographic projection flickered to life. At first, it was just symbols, coded data, shifting patterns of encrypted information. Then, the patterns resolved. Voss felt his breath hitch. A map, a fleet composition, and a signature he knew far too well. No, he whispered. That's not possible. The informant watched him carefully. You recognize it? Voss's jaw tightened. I more than recognize it. The ships in the projection weren't Trelzar. They weren't Concord. They were human. Warships bearing the insignia of the Terran Union. Explain, Voss ordered. His voice deadly quiet. The masked figure exhaled. Your people are not as united as you believe, Captain. Voss's hands curled into fists. This wasn't an external threat. This wasn't the Concord's enemies trying to drive humanity out. It was coming from inside. Someone within the Terran Union was orchestrating these attacks. Someone wanted this alliance to fail. And if this fleet was real, then war wasn't just a possibility. It was already in motion. Saravel was waiting when he returned. She took one look at his expression and stiffened. What happened? Voss threw the device onto the table between them. The projection flickered to life once more, bathing the chamber in cold, blue light. Her eyes widened. These are Terran warships, Voss finished grimly. Someone back home is playing their own game. A heavy silence settled between them. Saravel's expression hardened. You understand what this means? Voss nodded. Yeah, I do. Someone within his own people had betrayed him. Betrayed all of them. And if he didn't stop it, the war he had just prevented was going to happen anyway. Only this time, it wouldn't just be humanity versus the Concord. It would be humanity versus itself. And that was a war no one could win. Voss had seen a lot of things in his life. Battles, betrayals, impossible odds. But nothing chilled him quite like this. A fleet of Terran warships, moving in the shadows. Someone inside the Union wanted this alliance to collapse. And the worst part? They might already be too late. Saraviel stared at the projection, her silver eyes hard as steel. If your people are behind this, they're not my people, Voss snapped. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. At least, not all of them. Someone in the Union is making a power play. They don't want peace. They want dominance. The Queen studied him, searching for something. And what do you want, Captain? He met her gaze. I want to stop a war before it starts. Again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Saraviel nodded, as if coming to a decision. Then we have little time. The truth was a weapon, but only if used correctly. They couldn't just broadcast the fleet's existence. If the Concord panicked, war would be inevitable. If the Terran Union found out too soon, the traitors would go to ground. They needed proof. Evidence. A name. Voss had only one lead. The informant from the Ethereum Veil. And so, with Saraviel's reluctant blessing, he went back. This time, the masked figure was waiting for him. You return quickly, Captain. Voss folded his arms. You gave me just enough information to get myself killed. I need more. The figure was silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, they placed another data chip on the table. Voss picked it up, scanned it, and then everything clicked into place. His stomach twisted. No. The informant's voice was quiet. I am sorry. The name on the file wasn't just familiar. It was personal. Admiral Marcus Grayson, the man who had once been his mentor, his commander, and now, the architect of humanity's betrayal. Voss clenched his fists. Why? The informant's mask tilted slightly. Why does any empire seek war? Power. Fear. The belief that one's own path is the only right one. Voss swallowed the bitter taste in his mouth. He had looked up to Grayson, trusted him. Now, the man was about to drag humanity into a war they couldn't win, unless Voss stopped him first. Saraviel listened in silence as Voss relayed what he had learned. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. This admiral, he is powerful? Voss nodded grimly. Very. Then you will need to act carefully. He scoffed. Carefully? I need to be reckless as hell. Saraviel actually smiled at that. A small, fleeting thing. Then it is fortunate that recklessness is your specialty. Confronting Grayson openly was suicide. Voss needed a different approach. So, instead of going to the Union's high command, he went to someone who had even more power. The public. With Saraviel's help, he gathered the evidence, communications, fleet movements, encrypted messages tying Grayson to the attacks. And then he did something truly human. He leaked it. Every news outlet, every civilian network, every information broker across the galaxy suddenly had proof that the Terran Union wasn't just preparing for war. They had started it. And the Union, caught between outrage and internal chaos, had no choice but to act. Grayson was arrested within the day. His supporters crumbled. The war? Stopped before it even began. Voss stood at the observation deck of Saraviel's ship, watching the stars. The Queen stepped beside him, silent for a moment. Then, it is over. For now, Voss muttered. But there'll be others. There always are. Saraviel turned to him. And will you fight them too? He smirked. If I have to. She studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she extended her hand. Then let us fight together. Voss blinked. Then, slowly, he took her hand. Maybe humanity wasn't so unpredictable after all. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally found their place among the stars.